War is a time of violence, but it's also a driver of innovation. New technologies are created, some with great impact. Others, though, fail to do much of anything. This is the story of the Bat Bomb, an ambitious US weapons project that never saw action. So, what kind of genius thought of putting bats in a bomb? A general? A scientist? No, it was a dentist by the name of Little Adams. Adams is described as a little old man in a wrinkled suit and a soup-spotted bow tie. But this little man was persistent. Dr. Adams managed to get his proposal to the president through Eleanor Roosevelt, who he had met through some of his other high-ranking friends. In fact, Adams was also a pilot and had flown the First Lady around in his plane. He had also previously invented an air mailing system, so I wasn't doing a lot of dentistry, I guess. But anyway, FDR's note on a response to Adams' proposal is a direct quote.
"This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but it's worth looking into."
Now, here are some words from that proposal. "The lowest form of animal life is the bat, associated in history with the underworld and regions of darkness and evil. Until now, reasons for its creation have remained unexplained." I have some more. "As I vision it, the millions of bats that have for ages inhabited our belfries, tunnels, and caverns were placed there by God to await this hour to play their part in the scheme of free human existence, and to frustrate any attempt of those who dare desecrate our way of life. This lowly creature, the bat, is capable of carrying in flight a sufficient quantity of incendiary material to ignite a fire. If millions of bats carrying small fire bombs were released an hour before daybreak over a Japanese industrial city, they would fly down to roost in factories, attics, munition dumps, lumber piles, power plants, all the structures of a community, and the hundreds of thousands of fires ignited simultaneously in inaccessible places would be impossible to control. Bats hibernate during winter, and in this state of lethargy could be easily collected, fitted with tiny incendiaries, and transported without feeding or care other than to maintain the conditions necessary for hibernation. Just prior to release, the bats could be made active again by warming. A bat weighs less than 1/2 ounce, or about 35 to the pound." I mean, clearly he came prepared with quite a lot of thoughts about bats. Following this, passionate proposal, the National Defense Research Committee recommended an in-depth study on feasibility. The Chemical Warfare Service deemed the idea highly impractical, but Dr. Adams had friends in high places. He contacted Thomas R. Taylor, the Director of Staff at the National Inventors Council, who pushed the CWS to authorize more research on the subject. And so Adams started building a team to get working. A team of everyone from high school graduate bat enthusiasts to apprentice lobster fishermen. Also, a former child actor / son of a movie star, and later, a former gangster. This last character, Patricio Batista, had previously even worked for Al Capone. You're probably thinking that this Adams guy is unqualified for this job and he seems a bit eccentric, but that's just an understatement. For example, Adams didn't like that everyone on his team was technically only a private in the military, the lowest rank. So he gave his own ranking to those working under him. They just claimed to be acting staff sergeant or whatever to try to avoid trouble. So, off of whatever the hell he's doing over there, let's look at his plan. Now, they planned on using a Mexican free-tailed bat. Weighing 10 to 11 grams, these bats are ideal due to their high population. They also hibernate, which, can theoretically be induced for transport. As such, the crew headed to New Mexico to do some research. When going to discuss the project with military leaders, one general got the project confused with another weapons project in New Mexico. When Adams returned, he complained about that project to his team. "Yeah, we got a sure thing like the bat bomb going, something that could really win the war, and they're jerking off with tiny little Adams. Makes me want to cry." But Adams didn't just complain. He did the dirty work. One of his team members, Jack Hoover, later an Academy Award nominee by the way, provided an account of Adams exploring a bat cave. Doc began to strip off his clothes. We looked at him in amazement. Had he finally gone completely round the bend? Carefully, he folded his suit coat, trousers, shirt, and undershorts and hung them from a bush. Then, stark naked, he stepped back into his shoes, picked up a glowing lantern, and wearing a triangular newspaper hat like Washington crossing the Delaware, strode toward the cave. "I've got to fly to D.C. tomorrow," he said, "and that's my only suit. I'm not going to an audience of generals with my pockets full of bat shit." Now, the exact plans for releasing the bats in Japan were constantly shifting. While dropping them in special bombs was the core idea, suggestions were as radical as releasing them from submarines. Now, I just want to quickly draw a picture of what a bat bomb actually looks like. To visualize, think of little cubicles in round trays, stacked on top of each other to make the bomb. The bats then had the little incendiary capsules attached to them that would light the buildings on fire when they landed. On this regard, the team had a special asset. Harvard chemist Louis Pfizer joined the project, bringing with him his most famous invention, napalm. With this strong core idea in place, a test was performed at Carlsbad Auxiliary Airfield in 1943. The test was carried out with dummy bombs and seemed a success, but for the following photo op, real incendiaries were primed. This at the direction of Pfizer. Of course, the bats were cooled down to keep them calm, as if they're hibernating, but in that warm New Mexico sun... Oops, I almost forgot to add the fire bombs. Barracks, air traffic control tower, offices, and a hangar, all up in flames. The Carlsbad Auxiliary Airfield was left smoldering. In the months following this
incident,
the United States Army ultimately passed on the plan. However, the Navy stepped in. The project was given an official name. It'd be placed under the supervision of Colonel Dusty Rhodes. No, that's right. Finally getting some real oversight, things quickly degenerated. Rhodes discovered the acting nature of their ranks, aka fake, and blew up on them. However, stripping them would be a major embarrassment, akin to admitting that they got away with it for months, as it would be obvious to everyone on base that they had been stripped. So, poor Dusty decided to make the non-commissioned ranks official to avoid the embarrassment. And while all this was happening, some of the team members were engaged in a side quest. A Marine by the name of Fletch went on a trip to the San Antonio Zoo. While there, he met a tiger, and Fletch and the tiger got along famously. So, Fletch went to the superintendent of the zoo and told him about the Texas Tigers, which was just a name he made up for the group of bat researchers. He managed to convince the superintendent to let him have the tiger, who was now too old for the zoo's petting zoo, as a mascot for the team. So now the bat research had a 6-month-old Bengal tiger as a mascot. They named him Top Sarge. Unfortunately, they couldn't bring him with them when they're on the Navy base. And also, unfortunately, Top Sarge was not very well behaved. The tiger killed sheep when they were away with the Navy. Colonel Dusty was furious when he found out about the tiger and made Fletch get rid of him. So Fletch sold him to an Air Force captain for $500. But the captain was actually a deserter pretending to be a war hero, and the check he had left was actually worthless. He was tracked down, and Top Sarge was temporarily put in prison. He was eventually flown on a plane to the Los Angeles Zoo, under armed guard for fear of him escaping on the plane, where he lived happily ever after. Concurrently to all this, little Adams was in the midst of dodging the IRS. The doctor had committed tons of his own money to the project and had just kind of stopped paying income taxes. He figured it was easier than getting the government to reimburse him, which the IRS did not agree at all. Now, Adams had been dealing with Colonel Edwin E. Aldrin, father of Buzz, who'd been hooking him up with important materials, like gas rations, but he hadn't been supplying any money. Doc was running low, and he wasn't wasting any money on something stupid like taxes. Also, at the same time, there was an ongoing competition between Louis Pfizer and the underqualified Doc Adams. This wouldn't bode well for Adams, who would be slowly frozen out of Project X-Ray. At this point, it's been a few minutes since we even mentioned the bats. The last major change on that front was a switch to adhesive attachment, basically gluing napalm capsules to the front of the bats. However, without the indomitable Doc Adams pulling the strings, the project slowly lost momentum. The U.S. Navy discontinued Project X-Ray in 1944. Jack Kufer suggests the continued development of the atom bomb as the reason for discontinuance, but the complex variables at play in the plan likely played a role. The US never dropped a bomb filled with bats on Japan, which bats everywhere are delighted with this outcome. That's what I've got for you today here. Subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it. I'm History with Dino, and I will see you with my next one. Bang! Let's go.